Americans are still starting lots of businesses, but we're learning more about who. We're going to talk about that today on Builders Live. Hey there, I'm Chris Wink. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Technically, the news organization with a community of technologists and entrepreneurs with an unusually and uncharacteristically bushy beard that I will be trimming soon. Apologies to viewers. I'm having a conversation today on 4 years later, still having this entrepreneurship boom. We're talking about a bit more about the category of micro business that we've been following with our friends over at GoDaddy Institute there, Venture Forward. That is led by Alexandra Rosen. She's the global head of Venture Forward at GoDaddy. Alexandra, an economist, and I've learned also a poet. Alexandra, thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. All right. I got a bunch of specific questions on the research. You guys have a new report out that will drop looking at micro business. This is kind of an extension of the work that you guys do at GoDaddy. People with domains take a survey and you learn a little bit about what they do. We'll get there. But first, the lead of your bio is economist. So maybe just help me. We are 4 years into elevated rates of business starts. We were in a long-term decline or flattening after the Great Recession. It then popped in the madness of the pandemic. We're still at elevated rates, maybe a little bit of softening happening now. Help me understand if we're seeing some softening now, are we at the end of a pandemic bump of business starts, or do you think a paradigm shift happened and you expect years more of people creating and closing and starting more small businesses?
That's a great question, Chris. So I think we've observed two things happen in the last few years. So first, when we talk about micro businesses at GoDaddy, we're talking about people who have a domain registered with us and an active website. So they have a digital presence and predominantly 10 or fewer employees. So what are two things that help elevate digital entrepreneurship, which we've seen boom and continue to boom? One is access to fast and easy, reliable, affordable internet that comes from digital infrastructure. So during the pandemic and since then, there's been a lot of investments in various ways made to make internet more accessible for people. So that lowered the bar and barrier in people getting online. The other is for digital entrepreneurship is, what do you do once you have access to the internet? The skills to market, to create your business, to set up online. All the recent Gen AI, ChatGPT, GoDaddy Aero, all the tools available, plus the time, allowed now for people to get online easier and stay online and thrive there. So I think that combination, plus during that time period, of course, people were forced online because things were shut down. And since then, again, with these two lower barriers to getting online and thriving online, now they can do it easier with less capital involved, less resources, less skills needed. So I am optimistic that we're going to continue to see that.
I want to push into the micro business category and data you have, but just because you mentioned it, and every economist around labor and productivity are really interested to see where, when, or how does AI show up at all. We have lots of historical examples of when big technology took a while to really show up in the productivity stats. But just curious, because you mentioned it, in any of your surveying, are you seeing credible examples of where AI is really changing something meaningfully in efficiency or output from those you talk to?
Yes. So we've seen two different things. So our research has two different components, or multiple components. One is the survey. So that's the self-reported from these business owners. The other is we've partnered with economists at UCLA Anderson Forecast to actually measure the outcomes of economic impact and outcomes of these micro businesses, measure activity, things like that. In both cases, the answer to your question is yes. We're seeing in our surveys that micro business owners who recently tried GoDaddy Aero or other ChatGPT, Gen AI tools, are also ones who saw their revenue go up in the last 6 months and who feel more confident. And they tend to use it frequently for things they previously outsourced for. So maybe they were hiring someone to help them create social posts or content. They're now leveraging these tools. What we also saw is, since the adoption kind of late last year, there's we also saw website activity go up. And what I mean by that is e-commerce, website traffic in that same time period really spiked. So we think it is helping them reach their target audiences and engage them.
Here we'll be able to share in any follow-up story I do. There's good literature on companies that tend to invest in automation technology tend to hire more, have higher revenues as opposed to full displacement of workers, which is obviously counterintuitive, but makes sense in terms of who's investing in the future. Okay, let's push more into the micro business stuff. So I will first give you an admission. Sometimes when the kind people at GoDaddy pitch us over technically on the micro businesses, we're like, there's a lot of micro businesses in the world. That's not really our coverage area. But one of the framings that you've called out, Alexandra, in this most recent research is around serial entrepreneurship, which is also a phrase that sometimes I am skeptical of because I've talked to a lot of people through the years who want to call themselves a serial entrepreneur, and it seems a little excessive. But in this research, when I was looking at your kind of executive summary, what you called out was this common experience in your surveying of someone who started what might be called a micro business. You gave me the example of, hey, started a food truck. Maybe it didn't quite work. Maybe I closed down that entity before even really showing real, profits in tax filings. But that person then pops up later with, let's say, a consumer packaged goods company using that similar product. Talk to me a little bit about the resiliency that you called out in some of this work and how we in economics kind of journalism or storytelling should be thinking about people who start a thing. Maybe it lives and dies small, but that person might come back around.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's super exciting to talk about these, whether mom and pop shops, whether just online only, kind of that long tail entrepreneurs, because oftentimes we focus on high tech startups as well, but it's such a mindset and passion. And so what we're seeing is, for example, almost 1 in 3 of our current surveyed customers have right now more than one business, or it's not their first business. 75% of those who previously closed or sold without a profit, so they shut it down, or again, they made no profit, went on to create another business, as you mentioned, and almost 40%, 39% of those are now the breadwinner in their home. So that resiliency, that piece of they just don't give up. And it's not just about the short-term outcome, it's their drive to, again, whether they pivoted, whether they just tried again in a different way. And again, with it being easier to come online now more than ever, is super exciting. And they're not just supporting their households, as mentioned, by being the breadwinner or contributing, which we define as contributing 51% or more of your household income, but they're contributing to their communities. Because with those UCLA economists, as I mentioned, we've actually quantified correlation and causation that for every one of these micro business entrepreneurs, more than 7 jobs are created at the county level. So they're not just supporting their homes, they are supporting the communities because they are hiring, whether directly as they grow, indirectly by suppliers, advisors, consultants, whoever it may be, or just bringing money into their community from outside their community. So micro business entrepreneurship is such a key economic engine that's oftentimes overlooked because actually 18% we know from surveys are actually not in the traditional workforce. They're retired, unemployed, a stay-at-home parent, a student, or disabled. So again, sometimes in traditional statistics, they're not being counted, but they're engaging economically. So while they're small, they're super mighty, and sometimes they're overlooked.
It seems like you're noting there also on issues of multiplier effects, which come up in the economics literature a bunch, and those numbers kind of all over the place. So I might have to have you back another time and talk about that. I have to push forward, but I always find that interesting. There's just huge variety in what we think of as the multiplier effects. But similarly spirited, something I want to talk about is the representation we see in this micro business. Yes. We at Technically have reported a ton of these last 4 years that when you look at where did the net new business incorporations come from in the last 4 years, disproportionately from women, disproportionately from Black and Hispanic residents, especially Black women. We saw giant gains in those communities over the last 4 years. But one of the sticking points that at least I've been following has been the representation of Americans who start businesses look increasingly like American demographics, but those who grow businesses don't necessarily, adding employees. Now, that's predicated on this assumption from a pre-pandemic era when I was always trained and taught and informed that most wealth gain tend to happen when companies grew. More employees often was a proxy for greater wealth gains. This whole framing of micro business that you guys are pushing, it throws a little bit of a wrench in that you see more scale and leverage are able to come out of more of these micro businesses because of digital tools, selling e-commerce and the like.
Mhm.
Just talk to me as an economist, or as poet, you decide. But talk to me a bit about the good and the bad of micro business, which I used to be told the constraint was less wealth gain and financial good for those micro business entrepreneurs, but they got greater flexibility. I wonder how much you'd push on me. Just talk to me about the good and the bad of a micro business boom and when those people could be taking corporate jobs instead or what have you.
Yeah. So, and I'll address the why I think poetry and economics are very similar because they're both human behavior and creativity within a framework. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing here is there's a traditional framework and there's certain rules of engagement, and then there's how people are operating within that for their ultimate potential, for their passions. So to first address why people are starting micro businesses, you're absolutely right. Sometimes it's because they feel they can have more success on their own. They want supplemental income. So there's pay gaps, things like that. They want flexibility and time. But we also see number one reason is I want to be my own boss or I'm passionate about something. So whether it's again supplemental or main source of income, full-time or part-time, which have stayed actually pretty consistent in the last 5 years that we've been looking at this research. I think digital entrepreneurship is a positive force function for change because I think there's two ways to impact the system to help it evolve. You could do it from the inside, you could do it from the outside, or both. So 3 ways. We know that big companies, when they want to stay competitive, they have to evolve and stay agile. And so again, sometimes that comes from someone self-advocating from within, but sometimes it's because they're looking at the marketplace and understanding what's their competition. If the competition for human capital is this option now of microbusiness entrepreneurship, because it offers greater pay, greater time flexibility, then to compete for that, and if they want to grow within their framework, I think they will have to evolve and change too. And so those workplace changes may still happen. To address your point around, our vision of what is success, how you make a life and make a living, digital entrepreneurship, and we see this with all kinds of industries, because of the scale of technology and the reach of it, and this is exactly why microbusinesses are so important as well, is collectively, if you have a lot of customers spread out, and even if you're a very, very small operation, you can scale very quickly. So it's not just about more employees doesn't always lead to more revenue because there's also more overhead. So it's just technology's a platform on which we're building different types of business models and different visions and options for success. So I am very optimistic that they're not forfeiting more financial success by leaving a traditional workforce when they are. But again, we're also seeing a very consistent that people are doing this as a side hustle because they're just passionate about something, or they're going all in with their experiences, or they're then getting acquired. So I think it's flowing, and we're seeing very constants as there's a lot of movement from each side.
I have more that I cannot ask because I'm going to lose you here in a minute. So one thing I'll touch on. I am a follower of Pew Research Center's annual Trust in American Life surveys. Always really interesting. We have been for a decade seeing declines in trust. The pandemic was brutal for essentially all institutions in American life. Americans trust just about everything less, except for small business. It is the category that Americans across the political spectrum, it's like one of the only institutions or categories that Americans across the political spectrum have high degrees of trust and faith in. We're about to go through a presidential transition here. just kind of curious, you sit with micro businesses. What does the overwhelming support that Americans seem to give for the category of small business, how that category should even shift? What do you think we're about to go through, and what will change or what won't change about micro businesses in the next year?
Yeah. So I'll go fast. I'm just enjoying this so much. So
Same.
Looking data driven, because I extrapolate from what I'm seeing trend wise. So first, to just baseline. Since 2020, we've asked micro business entrepreneurs, what is your outlook on the national economy? What is your outlook on your business? Consistently, and we've done this actually across multiple countries, but I'll speak to the US specifically, obviously, is the positive outlook on their own business is usually twice what it is in the national economy.
Wow.
And it's been consistent in both cases. On their own business, it tends to be over 70% positive outlook because they are betting on themselves. Why would they be there if they thought it wasn't working out, really? Or maybe why would they take our survey, I guess?
Right.
And then for the national economy, it's been pretty also stable, and more closer to 30 to 40% in terms of positive outlook. So what that says is they are independent of their circumstances frequently. They are starting from any type of situation and they are betting on themselves. Entrepreneurship is very much a bipartisan issue, as you mentioned, which is super exciting because we know how important small micro businesses are to, well, one, economically, we're quantifying it better than ever, improving it, culturally, and just just to the whole foundation of our communities. So it seems like both sides of the aisle really respect that and really understand and find ways to support them in different ways. And I think as long as we're supporting them, whether it's helping with funding, access to capital, helping with access to internet, skills training, things like that, I don't anticipate changes because it seems agnostic to the administration, since this is just the American dream, quote, in quotation marks.
Alexandra, I could ask more. I won't. I appreciate your time. Alexandria Rosen, she is the global head of venture. Oh, goodness, I messed up your title. Sorry, Alexandria. We are the global head of venture forward at GoDaddy. Alexandra, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chris.
I will see everyone next time. So, yeah. Oh, and we'll drop below the video and in the recap story the most recent survey that this work is based on. And see you next time. Thanks, Alexandra. Bye-bye.